Vamos a dar introducción a esta mesa redonda que consideramos.
We're going to introduce this round table that we consider very interesting from Suterra, and it's an important one, but we consider it will have an interesting value for all of us. I'm the crop manager in Suterra, which is the company that sponsors this almost round table. And I'm Julio Aparicio, this is my name. And we deal with pheromones, which are rather well known. Suterra is the only company in the world that the synthesis and commercialization of pheromones with all the intermediate processes. And for those of you who do not know it, we deal with different pests, such as the cluster plague, for example, or plagues. When we have a rather long chain with a lot of links, we want to say that when we speak about wine quality, we need to understand how factors from the beginning affect during the different links towards the end. And we want to see how this language is changing and is being understood. That's why the fact of giving visibility to the importance of these factors is rather important, because today we speak about wines we're going to try to join all these factors with the speakers. I'm going to present the speakers, my colleagues. We are going to deal with wine cellars or wineries. Marco Pierucci is the agronomy Viña engineer, which is a company that advises sellers in a middle or size company focused in the area of Tuscany. And we will see that Marco's answers are really interesting, or will be really interesting. Then Tony Cantos, who is an enologist and the enological responsible person of the Juve Camps company, which is a leader company in wines and all types of wines, but especially sparkling wines. And then we have Jose Serrano, who is the purchase manager of Peter Riegel Wine Import in Germany. I hope that I pronounced it well. And he focuses on the import and distribution of ecological wines. After this round table, when we will ask questions, and I hope we will have a fruitful dialogue, we're going to leave like between 5 and 10 minutes so that the audience can ask us questions as well. So we have the different speakers here represented, and we can start by asking Marco. I would like to know how factors on the field are affecting to the quality of grapes, and whether these can be managed in a more integrated way, or is it difficult? How do you consider the factors that affect grape on the field? Marco. We cannot hear. Just a moment. We need to activate. Can you activate? Yeah. Thank you.
Per questa occasione che mi è stata data, e forse qui tra noi sono quello più felice.
So thank you very much for this occasion that you've given me to speak here. I am maybe the happiest person here because we are starting to speak about quality of wine starting from the quality of grapes. This is something that is given as granted, but we can say that on the field, the agronomist always needs to bear the enological objective on mind, because we need to sell and transform our product in the cellar and sell. And we need to understand the quality factors that impact grapes, the physical integrity of grapes, for example, meaning that we need to defend efficiently the grapes from plagues and diseases. It is necessary to implement a control of the whole canopy, that is of the whole state of grapes, because we need to avoid mechanical harms in grapes, such as plagues such as oidium or other types of rottenness or putrefaction. And we need to consider climate change, the harm by the sun that can impact grapes as well. Another factor is the set of factors affecting the potential quality of grapes. We, as agronomists, we try to improve the thickness of the grape skin with more cells in the skin so as to get more resistance. We work in the quality of cellular membranes, and few people know that the thickness of the skin is thicker, or depends on the resistance that depends on microorganisms in the rhizosphere, and therefore a healthy soil which is rich in microorganisms holding a plant that has good relationship with rhizosphere is stimulated through a mechanism called STR, among which factors one is the skin thickness. A healthy soil is a symbol of a more resistant grape. And the last factor that we need to consider is synchronization between technological and technical and aromatic considerations. All the selection of different varieties, porta, graft, and other factors that can be important. So, for example, how to fertilize, how to irrigate. This is a complex world, but it is a very nice one, isn't it? Okay, that's interesting to see how these factors are having an impact on the grape. How do you look for an improvement of the different factors? My question goes to the other two speakers. So, can we hear you? Yes. I would like to thank to Suterra for their invitation. For a company such as Juve Camps, we, in 80% of our production, we deal with long vintage wines. And therefore, quality of grapes is very important. For us, the worst enemy is botrytis, or mildew. As we know very much, it can affect a lot. But botrytis is even worse, because the worst case scenario would be to make wines from grapes with botrytis. And therefore, to avoid botrytis attacks is to guarantee, the first step is to guarantee the integrity of the grape, as Marco was saying, so that the grape does not open doors to these fungi that in certain humidity and temperature conditions can affect and carry the disease. And therefore, we need to have healthy grapes, full grapes, and minimize either by the selection of the vineyard or when we have serious attacks of botrytis, and especially if you deal with ecological agriculture, you don't have many tools to avoid botrytis or other plagues to open small doors to infect or contaminate the grapes. Okay, what are you doing against this now? Well, it's a bit radical, but we would say that our tolerance is 0 towards this. We don't have different qualities where we think that products that are depreciated because of a worse quality can find some exit in the market. No. Our tolerance is 0. And what is clear is that we need to inspect constantly the products that we receive from our suppliers and, of course, our own conditions so that we offer the optimum, the best quality ever. Okay, we have seen that the selection is very important, but in the case of the selection, all these characteristics, how do they influence when you need to make a purchase decision, Jose Serrano? Well, of course, you can have more opportunities with more different products. Now it is in fashion to do more longer fermentations with white grapes or sparkling wines with the yeast for a longer term. You can only do that when you have healthy grapes, because otherwise you need to press as much as possible and you have less range or possibilities to do more wines. You need to look for quality. Quality is very important. Today, it is maybe easier to offer higher quality because you have all means now. But if the grape is not healthy, of course, then you won't, whatever the means that you won't have a good result and you won't have a good wine. It is true that we are speaking about references. You can say, well, we're speaking about ecological wines, but because in the end they are trend and reference, and this is what is going to mark our path towards wines of a different quality. And these trends might not be reflected in the market, but we are convinced of the fact that this is the path that we need to follow, because we are dragging enologists and agronomists in this. We've seen that the communication between different links in the chain can affect, and the cause of a problem can be the consequence and cause of another problem. We're going to deal with the differences between the healthy grapes and the unhealthy grapes. So what are the quality parameters that we are using? Marco, what are the parameters that you are using to have healthy grapes? But what can you do in the field? What are your patterns in the field? Well, first of all, we need to distinguish between whether we are in a large terroir, and in that case, we need to try to make the plant to interpret the terroir. Plants that are resistant to stress, that in the grape can lead to a correct reading of the terroir, because those wines that are important in the terroirs need to imprint their memoir in the wine, and therefore their agronomic approach in those cases, because they are top of the game in our profession, need to approach everything that is happening with a lot of respect. With a metaphor, I would say that the agronomist or the vineyard manager needs to be like a skipper in a ship race. The skipper has a destination port that is assigned, which is the aim, but he is guided by the he needs to take this ship through the winds and different storms to the good destination, to the good port. And therefore, we can use, of course, a yacht, or we can use a ship with an engine. But we can not only consider the chemical characteristics that are interesting for an enological aim or finality, but this is a pillar that we cannot ignore today. It is necessary to consider the production procedure. Here we have different factors: the environmental impact aspect, the safety of the operators, and the sanity of, or the healthiness of the final product. That is, with the goal of zero residues. And this is one of the main pillars of quality, which marks the decision-making process. And they are totally different criteria from the technical solutions that were adopted years ago. Today, it is paramount to have a very important physical quality of grapes relative to an enological goal. How to achieve this? Well, this depends on many things, on the final product and the grape quality in terms of content, low environmental impact, safety for the operators that work in the vineyard, and also safety for the grapes, of course. Okay, yeah, well, in some cases you find an enologist that finds a lower quality grape. What to do with that? Well, we know very clearly that we cannot perform miracles, and this is something that can be applied to healthy grapes, but also to unhealthy grapes, because you may have high-quality grapes and do bad wine, but of course what you can never achieve is great wines with poorly qualified grapes, because you depend on the tannins and the quality of the grape. So if you're looking for excellence, this can only come through healthy grapes, and grapes that are at their optimum maturity level, that will bring you all the optimum level of all components, acidity, etc. So this is one of the problems with botrytis, because even though you take healthy and you work with healthy grapes, you need to harvest before their maturity period, so as to avoid botrytis to be disseminated. This is the same as if you construct a building with very good pillars and columns. So the foundations are good, but of course you need to construct the building in a good way as well. And okay, when you're using high quality grapes, the harvesting time is perfect. It needs to be perfect. Well, this is not always possible because of this. The botrytis and also other types of fungi attacks apart from botrytis and the climate, of course. And there is this window of opportunity of harvesting that is getting narrower and narrower due to the climate change. And this is, of course, another worsening factor. I would like to say something regarding this. Today, so I saw that you take the wine. You can see all this, and every time this is going to be more important from the point of view of transparency, and you are going to have a more protected environment. As you were saying, those people working in the vineyard need to be breathing pure air and not breathing as we saw like 10, 20 years ago. They were wearing masks to protect themselves from the glyphosate. We need to see what you're doing. We have the means now to see what we're doing, not only in the cellar, but on the field. And people want quality, and they do not expect to have good wines from a rotten grape, of course, because they would say, no, I'm not going to drink this. The most important factor, I would say, is to have a healthy grape. Oh, this is interesting, because the enologist was, some time ago, the enologist was really the one who was giving the quality to the wine, but now it is not that. I mean, it's a label. You want to see where it comes from, what is the type of soil these grapes were growing in, and what kind of quality of the grape as well. The quality of grapes is really important, not only the quality of wine. Well, this is like a chain with a lot of links, you know. Yes, it's true. I mean, we were saying this before. It's not only important not only what you see inside the bottle is important. It's the whole process, which is before or that is behind it, and the environmental conditions as well. In the areas in Tuscany, for example, the presence of enotourism, the so-called enotourism, is very strong. And tourists that go to visit the companies, our companies, they interact to understand. Apart from appreciating, they want to understand the wine and understand what is behind the scenes. And they really focus on the vineyards, because I have proposed myself as an enological guide or tour guide to our tourists that came to taste our wine. And I would say to them, okay, we can visit the fields. And they used to say, oh, no, I don't want to stain my soles. Oh, it's so hot now. And this is improving, because people want to understand what is there. At the beginning, there was a lot of mistrust in terms of the consumer. He didn't know what was going on on the field, and this approach has been changing greatly in the last decades. Also, in terms of chemical defense from chemicals, the copper, sulfur, they are chemicals that we introduce in our environment, and we have been working a lot in this aspect, that it is important to convey the message that in a evolved management area and defense area, it is possible to improve the environmental impact and reduce the substances that are causing this impact on the environment. The treatment by using machines, when a harvester is passing or a sprayer is passing through the fields, they generate some environmental impacts and health problems as well. And now the situation is very different. We are using more and more an approach based on the obstacle theory, meaning that if the main obstacle is ill, we used to use the agro-medicine or the agro-drug, but now we are trying to reduce the use of agro-drugs, and we use meteorological devices and softwares to try to minimize the impact of a phyto drug, and by reducing the doses of chemicals used, we introduce other substances that stimulate the resistance in plants or that act as an external barrier to reduce the amount of chemicals used, or we can apply some drugs such as pesticides in a different way as in the past. And in this sense, Suterra works in sexual confusion, which is a greatly environment-friendly technique. We're not going to deal with pesticides anymore, even though these are more and more selective. But we are going to change the insect reproduction by removing the pesticide from the environment, which allows us to manage the fields residue-free, grape residue-free, in the specific control of this or that plague. It is quite a different world from what we had 20 or 30 years ago. And we need to convey this message. In these areas marked by enotourism, that is, by tourists that are curious about or wanting to know what is happening on the fields, this is something that we need to also communicate. We need to really finish with the message of the high polluting winemaking, because bottles have a history behind, and today there are many companies that produce ecological wine without any label, and even though they don't have the label, they are really virtuous in their management, and we need to communicate this message to the final consumer. And obviously we need to continue offering high quality wines, and this is a factor that affects the ecological and agronomical part of the whole industry. We have seen how Marco has been saying how one of the plagues and pests that is producing a lot of harms, like the moths or the botrytis, for example. And the botrytis really are one of the conditions of the gluconic acid, which is a very important factor in cellars or wineries. I have found lately the fact that increasingly, not only in small cellars or wineries, but also large wineries, there are decreasingly tolerance, less and less tolerance to these plagues. Jose, in your case, do you consider these factors such as gluconic acid? Does this information reach the final consumer, or is the final consumer the one who is asking about these questions? Or, well, the final consumer always thinks that the grapes are healthy, that they are picked manually, and that they are pressed. They don't know the ins and outs of the vineyard. And my advantage is that my property is so wide, so large, that I can choose the best quality. Well, quality is a very complex thing. We can smell it, smell the organoleptic properties, but we also have mechanical properties. I can know perfectly well also the chemical properties, if it has gluconic acid, etc. There are so many possibilities to choose in an objective way what is quality, gluconic acid, toxins, etc. And of course, a wine needs to taste good, but there are many more subjective factors, even to the fourth decimal, even beyond the control by the operator, the regulatory council. For example, in the case of cava, the cava wine has a maximum of gluconic acid, which is about 200 milliliters, which is a rather low threshold. And these are elements that are driving us to become more and more cautious and precise when it comes to making wine, and also the tools that we can have under our control to evaluate and assess the wines. I can see that people perform analysis and they take the grapes, they put them in a little plastic bag, and they put them in the fridge. This is done by the final consumer. I've seen that. Maybe in large cooperatives this is more difficult to follow, but at least the smaller wineries give you the sensation, and this is true in Spain, in Italy, maybe a bit less in France, that they have a very thorough analysis, and especially in terms of gluconic acid. Marco, in this case, these factors such as gluconic acid, how it is demanded from you on the field to have such level? I mean, how is it demanded? For example, do I need this percentage, etc., or is there any tolerance, etc.? How it is demanded? On the field, normally, we are required a maximum quality level, that is a lower level of gluconic acid, of damage or harm due to botrytis. Remember that we have the mechanical damages, the oidium damages, or caused by different plagues. Only if we have particularly difficult years where the grapes start developing botrytis, these factors, 3 factors in general, need to be avoided. We can say that defense, and I repeat, it's not only anti-parasitic defense, but the management, chemical management, needs to follow this purpose. I was saying before that in the central part of Italy we have changed the leaf management, whereas 25 years ago we used to use a very early technique in the area of stalks. Now we don't do that because with this heat in the skin we can cause more organoleptic residues and anthocyanins, etc. And this leads to precipitation problems and other problems related to other fungi such as penicillium or aspergillus that are linked to these aesthetic harms, because the death of skin cells favors the setting up or the establishment of fungi such as the Aspergillum nigrum that brings about some toxins that are really, really harmful. And it all needs to focus and aim at having healthy grapes and avoiding everything that can represent harm to the grapes.
In some strains, this could be catastrophic such as in the Primitivo di Manduria in the south of Italy. In California it's called Siphoned, it's the same strain. It is very important to manage the water, because the grain have a dynamic of expansion depending on the available water in the plant that is very, very fast. And this creates cracking of the grains, and it has to be managed with a water system allowing the plant to have water constantly available in order to avoid this strong alternancy. Avoiding cracking, we also avoid rotting and other phenomena affecting the quality of the grape. So in the end, the agronomic approach is very, very complex. It is not just a defense against plagues, but it's something very complex in order to obtain the main goal: healthy, absolutely mature grapes corresponding to the technological maturity, pH, sugar, phenolic maturity, etc. Those things have been affected by climate change, of course, are very diverging, so we have to synchronize them again. And one last anecdote. I started working as an agronomist many years ago, 25 years ago. In the Tuscany, we wanted to have grapes with a sugar base in order to do harvest with 13.5 natural grades. But this was really, really hard, really challenging. In the end, we were able to get grapes with less than 15 degrees of grades. This is an evidence of the impact of climate change, not exactly because we are much better, but nowadays vines create much more photosynthesis than in the past. Okay, we are seeing a sort of connection, and one of the main challenges, Tony, today is the devaluation of the grape. What can we do with that loss of value apart from the market saying, well, we won't pay you anymore or that much because the grape is not good? Well, as I said before, there are many ways to mitigate this. We are talking about an intense attack of botrytis affecting the gluconic level, so there is not much we can do. What can we do? Not much. But when we are talking about more moderate attacks, we have techniques to mitigate this impact. Anyway, when talking about winemaking, we won't be able to have a good wine with affected wine. We have the gluconic level as our reference. That is what gives us information about the vulnerability of the grape. And of course, this would affect the evolution of the wine. Wines would mature much earlier, etc., etc. In front of this, if you have this component in the wine, there is not much we can do. So it is critical to ensure that the vineyard, the land is controlled, give the least or the fewest opportunities or chances to the attackers, so that in the case that there is a favorable climatology, favorable to the botrytis, this fungi would be reduced as much as possible. So it is important to avoid the damage using this sexual confusion, for instance, and be very, very observant, very attentive at the vineyard and see any attack coming. Mark mentioned before, and I think this will be our last section of the roundtable. he mentioned sustainability, innovation. These are very used words nowadays. They affect many sections of the chain, the supply, the elaboration chain. So can you share any anecdotes regarding climate change that has affected you in your production and that you are witnessing any impact on your yearly production? From the point of view of our figure in Chianti or Bordeaux, they had 12 and a half. They were really elegant, very durable wines, but now you won't find any wine below 14 degrees, and that can be kind of shocking to the consumer, because the consumers would tend to drink less wine after seeing this gradation. This is really challenging. This is more and more serious, and maybe a Puglia and Primitivo. That could be a goal, but you don't normally drink a wine to get drunk. You just drink a wine to enjoy the evening, to have a conversation. So 14 degrees could be too much for many people. Well, Marco was saying how he had seen an evolution in the grades in the Tuscany grapes, but I could share as an anecdote that in my first harvest in Chardonnay Caracava, that was the first variety that we harvested, we tended to see a harvest at around the 25th of August, and now we have to harvest on the 2nd of August. This is not usual, but it's more and more useful to start harvesting the first week of August. This is a proof of a change, and this brought another effect, variability and oscillation from year to year, and the phenomena that you can see, like in 2016, we didn't even reach the 250 millimeters of raindrop, but the following year, or in 2020, we saw levels that were kind of shocking, and anyone could have thought that we were in Galicia, in the north of Spain. So we suffered a terrible mildew, and then other years we had like drought. In the end, you need to forget about the topics and just be aware of the current data, because every year is different. And then in Europe, this adds complexity to the other factors, making the situation even more challenging. So to adopt preconceived solutions is not the way. You have to be more observant, watching the vineyard. Yes, that's right. We need to justify our salary more and more every year, because every year the situation is different, and you need to work harder. You cannot give things for granted at all. You need to see the grape, its maturation stage, etc. So you have to apply decisions from those observations.